What is going on, everyone? Happy Thursday. Welcome in to another edition of GC Live at the buzzer with your host, Jack Veltri. Appreciate you guys tuning in on this very chilly, just week in general, honestly, in Colombia. I mean, it's been, if you guys aren't living in Colombia and unaware of what's going on, I mean, the weather's been and freezing for number one. I mean, it's been in the 20s again this morning, but it's also been, we've had some snow this week, so it's been a weird week here. But we've got a lot of basketball to talk about today. We're going to be talking about the women's team getting ready for a huge top 5 showdown with number 5 LSU tomorrow. Did we say tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow early evening, whatever you want to call it, a 5 p.m. tip-off with the LSU Tigers. Kim Mulkey's squad undefeated still, but we'll see if Dawn Staley in South Carolina have something to say about that. And then later on in the show, we'll be talking about we can't put it off. Got to talk about the men's basketball loss to Florida last night at CLA. I'll have full thoughts on what transpired in that game. And yeah, got a lot to talk about. So before we get rolling, I want to talk to you guys real quick about our main sponsor of the show right above me here. If you're listening live right now, Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans. If you're in the market for a home or you need help with your mortgage, Clint is your guy to get in touch with. He's been in the mortgage industry for a very long time now, more than 20 years. He's a lifelong Gamecock fan, and he's also a longtime supporter of Gamecock Central and all of our GC Live programs. So if you're interested, give him a call, 803-422-6797. The NMLS number for him is 71597. Or you can go to ClintHammond.com. Again, all that info will be right above me here on screen if you're listening live right now. And also, while you're listening right now, if you're listening on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, wherever you're getting your podcast from, be sure to give this podcast a thumbs up. Would really appreciate it. And if you are listening on YouTube, go ahead, hit the subscribe button to our YouTube channel. Gamecock Central takes you 2 seconds. Doesn't cost you anything. And yeah, so let's talk some women's basketball first. And to help me do that, bringing in my good friend, Elijah Campbell from 107.5 The Game, the basketball aficionado, guru, whatever you want to call him. The guy knows what he's talking about. My man, how you doing?
I'm fantastic. Yeah, thank you for the intro. Your check will be in the mail in 3 to 5 business days. But I'm doing pretty good, man. It's I also just realized we're talking about this South Carolina LSU game in a New Orleans Saints sweatshirt, but rest have no affiliation to Louisiana State University. Just a fan of that pro football team that hangs out in New Orleans in that nice, pretty little dome every Sunday.
It's okay. You know, they got Spencer Rattler and stuff, so it all equals out for you.
It does, yeah. When you put it that way, yeah. This is just Spencer Rattler's team. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, man. Let's talk some women's basketball because look, the men's game, we'll get to that later in the show. Man. But we got to start out with something positive first. And this South Carolina women's basketball team has been nothing but that this year. I mean, they've been incredible this season. Their only blemish on the schedule, as we all know by this point, feels like ages ago, was when they went to California and lost to UCLA, the top-ranked team in the country, to Lauren Betts and company. And since then, man, they've played some really, really good basketball. Makes you feel like this team is much more on par with what they were last year. And for a time, it didn't feel like that was the case. But ever since that UCLA game, things are just clicked for Carolina. I think that's what the wake-up call that they needed, that like, hey, there is a reality where teams could beat you. Now let's not have it happen again. And since then, they've been phenomenal in SEC play so far. 6-0 to start out. Really dominant wins. I mean, the closest game you've had is, the Alabama game. You won 76-58, and that Texas game, in what basically felt like a game for being the top dog in the SEC, you won 67-50, and you're coming off a win over a top 15 Oklahoma team that you beat by 41 points. So you cover this team day in, day out, much more than I do. What has been your general impressions of the way things have gone as of late in SEC play?
Yeah, I mean, I think I like how you mentioned that UCLA loss. I think that kind of I don't love using the term wake up call, but I think it was necessary, right? I think maybe a loss like that was necessary to the improvement of this team to kind of realize what you have to be without your dominant center, right? Like the last dating back to like 2020, you've either had Camila Cardoso or Aaliyah Boston as the center, and those are dominant offensive and defensive forces. Without having that, you kind of have to change the structure of your team a little bit, and you kind of have to learn a little bit about yourself. And sometimes a loss is the best way to find out about yourself. And what better way to lose a game than to do it as a true road game in November against a team that will ultimately become the number one team in the country in UCLA. I have a feeling you'll be seeing them in either late March or early April. But this team too, Jack, I mean, as much as the three-pointers and Mylasia Full-Wiley's highlight offensive plays and Joyce Edwards really emerging as a post presence on this team and the offense being really the sexy thing about it, the defense is what separates this team from everybody else in the country. Like they just absolutely smother you. And I don't know if I've seen a team be so dominant defensively at home specifically, right? I mean, if you just go through the list of what they're holding their opponents to in terms of points per possession in home games, it's comical, right? So Oklahoma 0.75, Texas 0.67. I mean, in Texas A&M 0.62. Like they've only been 2 games this year where they've given up more than a point per possession. That was at UCLA in the loss, and then at TCU. You play this team at home. You're not scoring a point per possession. And that's usually the standard that these teams try to reach, right? When they look at the stat sheet at the end of the game, if they want to determine whether or not you had an acceptable offensive game or not, they look at, did you get to at least a point per possession? And South Carolina has not given that up at home, and they haven't been particularly close at giving it up at home either. Like Madison Booker will be a unanimous All-American, probably a first-team All-American, preseason SEC Player of the Year. For a reason, she's one of the best players, best scorers in the country, and she was 3 for 19, right? Like, sure, some of that might be unfriendly away gyms, but this team, even without Ashlyn Watkins, who went down for the year with an ACL injury at the Mississippi State game, this team defensively has seemingly not skipped a beat, and that's just because they're all locked in. Like defense is the one thing that gets you out on the floor, and like I love using Mylasia as an example, right? In terms of visuals and the aesthetic of watching a team play defense, there's not a player I think I love watching play defense more than Mylasia or Raven Johnson, because they will harass you over on the perimeter. They get steals because they provide probably some of the best ball pressure you'll see in college basketball, men or women. Like they apply steady ball pressure, and if you do end up getting into the lane, they help so well. They're so locked in, they're so connected that they help well enough to where you might get into the lane to the block, and you might get the ball where when you draw up an offense, this is where you want to take your shot from, but you're shooting it at such a higher degree of difficulty than you would against anybody else because they rotate well, they're so in sync, and some of that does come with basically the whole team playing together last year. And having that level of athleticism, that even without Ashlyn Watkins, this team will just make you shoot tough shots the entire game. And if you're playing at CLA, buddy, forget about it. Forget about it. You're not getting good looks at the basket the entire time because this defense just smothers you. And this is one of the more quintessential Dawn Staley coach defenses I think that we've seen in a while.
Yeah, the defense has really, really been solid. I mean, look, South Carolina can honestly go out and score enough to win a basketball game, even if they had a porous defense. But they are able to score at a high rate while also playing phenomenal defense. And that's why you see these large margin of victories that this team has. It's not one thing's better than the other. They're just such a well-balanced team to where Dawn's doing a great job working with these girls and making the most out of what they have. And look, it's tough losing Ashlyn Watkins again, but this time to an ACL injury where she's gonna be out for the year and stuff. And so you got to fill those minutes. I feel like Carolina does a really good job of, like I said before, getting the most out of everybody. I mean, that Oklahoma game, you won by 41 points, but you also had 5 different players finish with double-digit points, 3 of which came off the bench, and Joyce Edwards wins SEC Freshman of the Week for her solid outing at Alabama, and then 17 points on Sunday against OU. I feel like she's really come together nicely. And then I want to get back to her in a second. Then you mentioned Malaysia earlier. She had another great game. That 3-point shot she took at the buzzer was phenomenal. And it's crazy that they could have her, Joyce, and Tessa all coming off the bench. Like that's 3 starters on most teams on any college basketball team. It's crazy that how deep this team is. But Joyce Edwards specifically, I know she struggled early in the year with turnovers and stuff, and she kind of went through the freshman woes a little bit, if you will. Mm-hmm. But I feel like she's really picked it up lately, and obviously winning SEC Freshman of the Week will validate that to some extent. What have you seen from her that's really stood out in coming along nicely for South Carolina?
Honestly, one of my favorite things about Joyce is how she's gotten really better, and this is going to sound crazy. The sentence itself is going to sound bizarre, but stick with me here. She's really good at scoring without the basketball, meaning she gets herself in position to score so much better than most true freshmen that play major college basketball at or a freshman or a first-year player at any level. She's so good at posting up and being able to make sure that she's in position to score the ball the minute it comes to her, right? In the Texas game, there were a couple plays where they basically would run like repost ups where the ball would go to one side of the floor and Joyce is posting up one way and sealing her defender to where the pass isn't there in the corner, right? Because the defender's on her left hip on the left side of the floor, and the pass isn't there because you could throw the lob pass, but the lob pass would give the help defender enough time to go over there and steal the ball. But instead, Joyce keeps her on her hip. The ball goes back up to Sanaya at the top of the key, and at that point, Joyce has this defender so far sealed back on her hip that her right hand is basically leading to the basket, and Sanaya gives her an easy pass and it's catch, layup, right? But that bucket wasn't scored, in theory, when Joyce caught the ball and put it in the basket. She earned that bucket by how she pinned that Texas defender on her back hip and kept her out of position to catch the ball once the pass was made. So even if Sanaya was off target on the pass a little bit, it's still going to result in 2 points because of how well she sealed. It's the little details like that I think a lot of freshmen in college basketball sometimes need like a month or two acclimation period to be able to understand and learn because it's just different, right? Like at the high school level, like think about where Joyce came from. Camden High School, right? It's not even 5A in South Carolina. I believe there's still 3A. And it's your 3A high school basketball is significantly different from a talent standpoint that you're going to play once you get into the high school level. I know she does the AAU and the travel circuit, and that's where she plays her best competition. But like in terms of long form seasons, you've been playing them against players where you can just out athlete them, run up and down the floor faster than them, stronger than them, bigger than them, and you're scoring at will, and no one's stopping you. It's not the case in college basketball because while you might face one college basketball player, 2 or 3 or 4 college basketball players that play at the D1 level in one season at the high school level, everyone you play against at this level is SEC good. And so I think it maybe took some time to acclimate that, especially when it came to ball handling, because no one's swiping the ball at you at Camden High School and stealing it from you with ease, right? That wasn't happening. But she's adjusted so well, and she fits in. Like at some points in the game, she'll step in and be their best scoring option because she's got great touch around the rim too. And that's one thing that I love about her and her game is how efficient she is. If she gets a shot around the basket, buddy, it's going in. I mean, the last 2 games, this is kind of how you earn Freshman of the Week honors, right? In 2 conference wins against Alabama and Oklahoma is by going 15 of 20 from the field. 15 of 20 from the field. You can't argue with going 15 of 20 from the field. Just doing the quick math in my head, which is always dangerous. Games about 75%. Shooting 75% is insane. Like that is incredibly efficient. I mean, it's like if she gets that ball, she's scoring with it. And it's because she also does so much of the work to be able to get herself in position to score before the ball even comes her way. And I think she's not forcing the issue. The ball's finding her organically. That's my favorite thing about basketball is that if you work to get yourself open and you do the work to get yourself an open shot, the ball will ultimately find you, right? It's got a brain of its own. Like Rasheed Wallace used to say always that ball don't lie, but ball don't just lie at the free, tell truce or not truce at the free throw line. The ball will tell truce while it's in play too. You work to get yourself open, that ball will find you and you will score. So I think that's one thing that she's done a really great job of. And one thing I love to watch when it pertains to what her game has become is how efficient she is around the basket.
Yeah, she's done a phenomenal job as of late. And again, you could say that literally about this entire South Carolina team because they are good from top to bottom, even without having someone like Ashlyn Watkins, who's so critical to the success of this team.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's not a one-woman show. It's literally top to bottom. Like I said, this team's great. All right, let's talk about the big game now. Number one, gotta ask, what are your thoughts on Kim Mulkey's the outfits she'd be busting out every single week?
I think it's extra. I think it's always a little extra, but at the same time, that's what makes Kim Mulkey, right?
Yeah.
Love her, hate her. That's what makes her great for the sport, right? She's brash, she's loud, she's demonstrative. She is also a head coach that has won national titles at 2 different schools, and these are the type of coaches that the sport needs, right? I'm currently reading a book called the Big East. It's Dana O'Neill from The Athletic. The book she wrote about the Big East, and it's kind of like an oral history of how that conference began. And it's amazing to read through that and read about how, like, the personality of coaches and the variety of coaches in that league helped spawn its popularity, right? And so it gave that league so much flavor and made it such a great television product. And the Big East helped ESPN, and ESPN helped the Big East, and vice versa, to kind of grow into what they became. And I think Kim Mulkey's a lot like that in women's college basketball. And Dawn Staley is too. There's a love him or hate him type deal that goes with it. But being so demonstrative, being so like peacockish in terms of how you dress, right? Like every game that Kim Mulkey coaches, it's a look at me contest or look at me fest, right? She is a Shakespearean actor in a play. It almost feels like sometimes, right? Because it is at times really extra, but that's what makes not just the rise of women's college basketball and popularity so much fun. It's not what makes her just such a great character in this play, if you will, to stick with the analogy. It's what makes this game every year significantly must-watch TV. Like, it is a must-watch TV event every year when Dawn Staley's South Carolina team and Kim Mulkey's LSU team square up. They're the last 2 national champions. These are 2 of the best coaches in the history of the game, right? They're trailblazers in their own right, and they carried themselves differently from each other. Some similarities, because Dawn will rock the Eagles jerseys on Eagles game days, and there's not a single coach in men's or women's college basketball I have seen do that, maybe ever, right? I love when she's out there rocking the Randall Cunningham jersey on Eagles game days. But like they're unique, and they have their similarities, and they have their vast differences, and those differences can feel as vast as the Atlantic Ocean. But like that is what makes this so compelling. And that is what makes, a game like what's going to happen tomorrow night, even if it's rescheduled 21 hours after the, time it was originally scheduled for, still must-watch TV.
Yeah, and you need those types of characters in women's college basketball because, look, for the last few years you had Angel Reese, Caitlin Clark, obviously the big name that everyone in women's college basketball has grown to just love. I know South Carolina fans probably feel indifferent about her, but whatever, right? But
they got her back.
They got her back. But you had the players to kind of go off of to create the lust for the desire to watch women's college basketball. They're off to the WNBA now, so you need others to kind of fill in. And look, I haven't watched a ton of women's college basketball outside of South Carolina, obviously this year. But I will say, like, it doesn't feel like there's as many big names as we've been accustomed to seeing. But you have the constants that are the Dawn Staleys and the Kim Mulkeys. That rivalry on its own is big enough to draw in viewership. And I would guarantee tomorrow night, even if it's a 5 p.m. tip-off, I still feel like that arena is going to be packed, number one. And I don't remember the numbers on the viewership last year. But, I mean, look, South Carolina LSU, that was a really highly viewed women's game at Baton Rouge last season, and it's always entertaining to see these 2 squads go up against each other. And you mentioned it, like Dawn with the Eagles jersey and stuff. That's her personality. That's her swagger. But then you also have Kim Mulkey with the crazy outfits and the antics and stuff. And people, love them or hate them. I mean, it's good for the sport to have things like that. And when you need viewership, when you need interest to peak, you got stuff like that, and it's good. And it doesn't damper the sport. I think that's the main thing. Like, yeah, people don't like Kim Mulkey, but guess what? She's putting butts in seats. She's bringing in viewers, and she's good at what she does. I mean, like, she's been great ever since she got to LSU, because she was at Baylor for ages, it seems like. And her squad this year is, you can make a case for LSU being the best team in women's basketball as of right now at 20-0. But I will say, correct me if I'm wrong on this, man, I just feel like LSU hasn't been as battle tested as South Carolina has been. Now, part of that is due to nothing they can do about the SEC schedule. Like, they've played some good teams. Obviously, they beat Tennessee recently. They've also beaten Vandy, Florida, Auburn, and Arkansas. But I mean, going back to non-conference play, their best win in non-con was NC State. And so they're 3-0 in quad 1 games, but they've got a lot of quad 4, quad 2 type wins, nothing substantial. Meanwhile, South Carolina, it seems like almost every game they're playing someone that is really difficult. And again, this is the same program that tries to schedule the best of the best, but there are teams out there that don't want to play them for whatever reason, obviously, not to get embarrassed by one of the best programs in women's college basketball over the last few years here. But this game, I mean, we're going to learn a lot tomorrow about these two teams, and I don't think a loss for either program diminishes what they can do the rest of the year, but it sure as heck helps either one of them propel themselves to being the top team in the SEC. Do you feel that same way?
I think so too, and I agree that LSU's nowhere near as battle tested. I think this is the game where you really find out what LSU has, right? This is really the first game this year against what I would consider an elite team. Like, NC State's good, right? But they had some losses, and they beat NC State pretty handily on a neutral floor. But Stanford's good, but Stanford's not Stanford, right? Like, Stanford's ranking this year, if you look at on Torvik, is outside the top 40. So it's not national title contending Stanford. Stanford still took them to overtime, but a win's a win. They've got a good break in conference play by starting off with Arkansas and Auburn, who I think are probably towards the bottom of the league. Auburn, no faults of their own. They've had some brutal injury luck this year. But the Tennessee and Vanderbilt wins are really impressive, especially the Tennessee win, because Tennessee's kind of they've got a breath of fresh air with the new coach and a new play style that is exciting to watch, and they score a bleep ton of points any given night, and they won that game in thrilling fashion on the road in a hostile environment, and that's their most impressive win this year, and I don't want to diminish that. It's a great win. But this is where you find out what you're really made of against the elite of the elite, right? Angel Reese her departure is really the biggest difference, because you still have a team that is guard-oriented. Flau'jae Johnson and Anissa Morrow and Kaylin Gilbert, all fantastic guards who can really get their own and score at will. They can either score off the bounce, they can score on the catch and shoot. It's going to be one of the harder guard trios that you're going to see all season long. And I think that's going to be one of the things to watch in this game, is how much can they make a difference when it comes to creating your own shot on the inside, right? Because South Carolina this year has I think top 3 2-point defense in college basketball, and you saw a glimpse of that against Texas, right, where Texas wanted to establish a post presence, and you couldn't do it. They tried to get the ball inside, get downhill on drives, and finish at the rim. Couldn't do it, because this South Carolina team is really good at erasing their mistakes at the top to keep, because of how well they help defensively. This LSU team's interesting. I don't think they're better than last year. I think they're different, and they're interesting. And this is one where you're going to learn maybe more about LSU than you will South Carolina, because you're right. South Carolina is so battle-tested that I think we know what this team is. Even though we haven't gotten to February, I think you know what this team is at this juncture of the season, because they played not just elite teams, they played a variance of teams in style, right? You played an up-tempo team in Oklahoma, and you beat them by 40. You played a team like UCLA where you lost against a team that has much better size than you. You lost that game, but then you turned around and played TCU on a neutral site, and you beat them like a drum, and they have a girl starting at 6'7" in Sedona Prince, who does kind of mirror Lauren Betts a little bit. They vary in play style, but still a team that has equal to better size than you then turned around and beat, right? So, and that's also a TCU team that I wouldn't sleep on to make a run in March whenever that comes around too. That's a sneaky, really good team right there. But you've seen them battle tested against so many different types of teams and pass a lot of those tests. You know what the South Carolina team is. This is the first time that LSU is playing an elite college basketball team, and that's where we're going to really start to learn more about them and how legitimate they are as a title contender despite being 20-0.
If there's one area that you worry about South Carolina going up against LSU, because I mean, like you mentioned it, the guard play has been phenomenal this year. Like when you have three guards that are scoring more than 16 points a game, with Flau'jae having 20, Anissa Morrow having 18 and a half, and Michaela Williams having 16 and a half, and even Kaylin Gilbert's giving you 11 points. You know, that would worry me. I mean, like those guards are really, really good. And you also have Anissa Morrow averaging well over a double-double with 14.2 rebounds as well. I mean,
she's awesome.
It's insane. So I think that's probably a worry is like, okay, LSU's got really good guard play. I think South Carolina's got really good guards too. But, I mean, what is that something that concerns you with how good those LSU guards are? Or is there something else that you would pinpoint as number one concern? South Carolina is going to get this thing right, and make sure they they play well in this facet of the game.
It would concern me a little bit. Like this is going to be a really good test for South Carolina's guards, right? This is defensively. This is going to be another good test for Raven, for Malaysia, for Tessa, for Tahina. This is an LSU team that they're going to be able to get downhill and get what they want. They shoot really well, right? This is a team that you look at last year. The strength, like LSU's offense last year was at its best when they were missing shots, and Angel Reese was getting offensive rebounds. They're living on that second chance points. Well, Angel Reese isn't there. This is still the number one offensive rebounding team in college basketball. They're grabbing 45% of their missed shots. So they thrive on those second chances. And they're also still really efficient when it comes to shooting. They're still, right around average in three-point shooting. But because they rebound so well too, they are able to create a lot of their second chances and create a lot of their own shots. Like that's my thing with Flau'jae too. I think she's one of the more talented guards in all of college basketball. And if you can lock her down, you can lock down anybody. The variety of scoring they have on the perimeter with their ability to rebound, I think Anissa Morrow has kind of overtaken that responsibility as being the chief offensive rebounder officer on this team. That plays a pretty big role. And because she is efficient too, she can hurt you with those second chances. So that's definitely, if there's anything that would concern me for South Carolina in this game, it's what maybe Kim Mulkey has up her sleeve in terms of ways to get her guard shots and get them open shots. Because if they hit a couple perimeter shots from outside and hit a couple threes early on in the game, they established maybe a 7-8 point lead, kind of like what they did at LSU last year, and you have to play from behind, it can get tricky. It can definitely get tricky. But if you make them shoot tough shots and play the percentage game, I think you'll ultimately be fine. But definitely from a talent standpoint, where LSU stands out is just that backcourt. It's about as deep and talented as anyone's gotten in college basketball.
Here's a good question here that it leads us into a good point about going off the guards here. And Jesse James asks, if South Carolina's guards play as much as LSU's, would they average more points than them? And you look at the numbers. The thing with South Carolina having so much depth is that you're able to check in so many different players into games. Like going back to last year when these two teams met, South Carolina's plugging and playing, 4 people off the bench in that first game and then 5 in the SEC championship game and whatnot. Meanwhile, LSU, and again, different teams to some extent, but most of the same players are on the LSU team. They're rotating in 7 players in total with 5 starters and 2 bench players. And you look at the LSU team this year, I mean, Flau'jae Johnson's averaging 31 minutes, Anissa Morrow, 32 minutes, Michaela Williams, 29, Kaylin Gilbert, 20. And then you also have, players coming off the bench averaging 15 minutes or more. Meanwhile, South Carolina, you don't have any players averaging 30 minutes. Heck, your
Nope.
highest average minutes is Te-Hina Paopao with 25 minutes a game. Everyone else is hovering around 20 or under. I mean, Raven Johnson's averaging 24. But the point is, Joyce Edwards, for instance, she leads the team in scoring, 12.1 points per game. She's only doing it in 20 minutes. And keep in mind, she's been coming off the bench.
Amazing.
I mean, your two highest scorers, her and Full Wiley, both coming off the bench. So I guess to kind of answer the question from my perspective, I feel like probably not. I mean, maybe if Joyce plays 10 extra minutes a game, she's probably getting close. But again, like that, we would need a whole season sample size. It's not going to change drastically if they're just playing 35 minutes a game the rest of the way. I mean, it will to some extent, but maybe not 20 points a game. But if it's over the course of a season, do you feel like South Carolina is probably better than LSU from that standpoint with the guards scoring as much as they do for the Tigers?
Yeah, I think here's the thing. It's a balance thing. I know Jesse's question, it kind of pertains to the minutes. And if you do prorate the scoring per 40 minutes, your highest scoring guard is Mylasia Full Wiley at 23.8 points per 40 minutes. And I guess if you prorate someone like Flage will still probably have more. But there's the thing, too. The depth issue, or I don't want to say issue, because it's not like LSU has a depth issue. They have good depth. They just don't have South Carolina's depth, right? And also, who the hell does, right, other than South Carolina? So when it pertains to that, like, the amount of shots that they're getting in 30 minutes is a lot different than maybe the shots Mylacia's getting or that Tessa's getting or Te-Hina's getting in 30 minutes because you have so many more scoring options, right? Like I'll kind of spin the question this way. If Te-Hina Paopao was still at Oregon, would she have more points than Flage Johnson? I think probably. If she was the number one focal point on the offense and you were doing nothing but running ball screens at the top of the key to get her to either pass or shoot threes or run her off screens, which South Carolina does a really good job of running their shooters off screens. If you kind of had a roster where it's Te-Hina and more replacement level players, Te-Hina probably could put up 25 a game. I think her scoring ability is very, very similar to in Mylasia as well to LSU's. I think if you put them all on different teams, they probably do put up similar scoring numbers. But what this team does really well is they score within the confinement of the offense, right? Like they're never above their skis. They play within the offense so well. And because you have so many returners on this team from last year's team, you didn't have an acclimation period to where you have to learn how you're getting your buckets, right? You see a lot of that in college basketball today where there's some ugly basketball being played in November and December because you have to reacclimate and you have to be able to find the best ways that your team is scoring points in games. And the South Carolina team didn't really have to do that because they understand the flow of their offense and the responsibility that everybody has in the offense where everyone's supposed to be. And a lot of times the ball will just find the open player. Don talks about that in postgame all the time. The ball will find the right player and the right player will shoot the ball. Not to say LSU doesn't do that, but those guards don't have that same type of responsibility. They have a scoring responsibility. When you play 30 minutes in a game and you don't bring as many players off the bench and you don't rely on as many players off the bench, Flage Johnson, Kaylin Gilbert, Michaela Williams, and Issa Morrow are all asked to do the bulk of the scoring. They have about 4 players that make up a high percentage and chunk of their scoring, whereas South Carolina, it is dispersed across the board, right? Anyone can get you 10 to 15 any night. On any given night, any one of those players is capable of giving you 10 to 15, and almost always they will get you something in that area, right? That's how you can score as many points as South Carolina does and have a leading scorer that's only scoring 12 points per game because that balance is unmatched in this sport right now. So to Jesse's question, I don't think it's the minutes that are holding them back. It's the roles and responsibilities that maybe keep them from putting up the same type of scoring numbers that Flage does.
Mm-hmm. No, great question there. Great answer from Elijah here. All right, last part of this women's basketball talk before we spit over to the other side of things.
The thing that happened last night.
The thing that we have to talk about. Which way are you leaning with this game? There's no wrong answer here. You could say LSU if you want, but I feel like with the way South Carolina's playing, it'd be hard to pick against them, right?
Yeah, I think South Carolina even wins by 20. It's how they play in that building, man. When I leave this building and I walk down to CLA, that team goes from good to great immediately. Like they just don't lose in that building. I'm not picking against Dawn Staley in the house that she built, right? Like I'm not going to walk into your house, Jack Veltri, especially if you built it with your bare hands and say, you're not going to win in any game in here. I can't do that. I would almost feel disrespectful saying it. But, and from a basketball standpoint too, like this Carolina team plays such great defense that even if LSU gets off to a hot shooting start, it'll regress, because what this team does at home defensively is so different than any team in women's college basketball. I still think, LSU's can come in here. They're going to be ultra competitive because that's what LSU does. They compete. Any Kim Mulkey coach team is going to compete. But I still like South Carolina to be able to win this thing by 20, even if it's going away later in the game.
Yeah, I feel good about the Gamecocks winning this game as well. And that game tips off tomorrow night, 5 p.m. on ESPN. Again, no college game day in town, unfortunately, but I'm sure they'll be back at some point here to make it up to the Gamecocks with the inclement weather and all that. All right, enough chit-chat. Let's get down to serious business here. Men's basketball last night. I mean, oh, my gosh. You and I, we're not going to go, wire to wire talking about this thing of like breaking down every nitty gritty detail, man. We did that last night. You can check it out on 107.5 The Game. And we're talking all day about this stuff. But also we had our post-game recap video last night going into the nuts and bolts of this game. And then also on Gamecock Central on the YouTube page. Right after you're done watching this, you can go check out my quick recap video from the game last night. But we got to talk about the main points from this game. I mean, the reason why South Carolina lost 70-69 to Florida last night, number 5 team in the country. Matter of fact, let me paint the picture for you real quick. South Carolina played very well last night for the most part. And there's going to be a big asterisk next to that because of what transpired at the end of the game. You had a lead as high as 14 points at one point in the second half, and things are rolling. You're up by a wide margin. It's like, okay, are we getting ready to see South Carolina get their first win? Heck, they were up by 13 with under 9 minutes to go, and that's where everything in this game changed. In a matter of a minute, Florida cuts the lead down to 7 points. They go on a quick run. Heck, they get it down to 6 points, actually, with just over 7 minutes to go. And then South Carolina answers back. Then Florida goes on a run. And then it gets to being 68 all. And, Will Richard for Florida, give him credit. A nice layup to get the go-ahead bucket. The only lead Florida had in this game was in the final 5 seconds. South Carolina led for 39 minutes, man. 39 minutes and still lost this game. But I think the reason why they lose is multitude of reasons. Number one, as soon as South Carolina got up to that huge lead, Florida started running the press a lot more often, and it affected everything the Gamecocks did. Like running that press, forcing the amount of turnovers they did. South Carolina only had 3 turnovers in the first half. In the second half, they had 12, 9 of which came in the last 8:45, which pretty much coincides with the time where South Carolina's lead started to disintegrate and disappear.
Yeah, this was kind of the theme in the SEC last night because Georgia did the same thing at Arkansas. Ole Miss did the same thing against Texas A&M. Those 3 teams. So in those 3 games, just do the quick math, that's a combined 120 minutes of basketball. Jack Veltri, Ole Miss, Georgia, and South Carolina led for 119 minutes and 40 seconds of those possible 120 minutes.
Insane.
Would you like to guess the record of those 3 teams last night?
0-3.
0-3.
It's insane. By the way, South Carolina is now the only team in the conference without a win at 0-6. Arkansas did win last night, as Elijah mentioned, and they were the only other team without a win so far in SEC play. And South Carolina, 0-6, tied for their worst start to conference play. I believe since 2014 was the last time. And if they lose on Saturday in Mississippi State, we're looking at a new record. And yeah, I mean, look, it's rough right now. I think this is pretty close to being rock bottom for South Carolina.
It's close. And last night was kind of a microcosm of what your issues are. And it's not just that it's turnovers, it's that it's turnovers from your backcourt. And it's that one team can make a slight adjustment. And it's not like Florida ran this incredibly complex matchup zone full court press, right? It's the ball is being inbounded. It's basically a 1-2-2 type format, right? You had a player pressuring the inbound, or the player receiving the inbound pass, and they're mirroring them one way to the floor or another, right? They're trying to guide them to one way to the floor or another. And once that guard picks where they're going to go, they basically lure them into a trap. And that trap worked with amazing efficiency. Like, Jack, I think Lamont put this really well last night, and I appreciate him being candid about it, because he said, I've never seen this happen at the collegiate level where a team forces turnovers that frequently with the full court press. In the high school level, right? I mean, when I was in high school, we played a team called Ooltewah High School in Chattanooga, notorious for pressing. They would press the entire game, right? So the week leading up to it, all we would do is practice our full court, press break and our press break offense. And even the first 5 minutes of that game, I think we turned the ball over like 4 or 5 times. But ultimately, we calmed down. It was inbound pass across the middle. Like, you have a set plays to get you across half court. And then after we break the press a little bit, they'd still do it, but it didn't bother us as much anymore, because then we got into the flow of the game. But even then, I mean, we still would turn the ball over a decent amount. But at the college level, you'll see a similar thing where a team will press, and you might get 1 or 2 steals and dunks, threes the other way. Very rarely do you see a team get completely tortured by a full court press for a 10-minute stretch. And that is exactly what happened to South Carolina last night. That's what Lamont said. He goes, I didn't think we'd still have trouble with it that entire stretch. Their full court press offense, to put it bluntly, was atrocious. And I will use Zach Davis's words here. They got timid. They were absolutely timid with the basketball. And you cannot play timid with the basketball against the Florida Gators, because they thrive on scoring in transition. They thrive in scoring off of turnovers. And they will feast off of your fear. And that is exactly what happened last night. They dribbled the ball into the hot spots, into those traps, and they would either get stolen there, or they would make a pass, and a help side defender would read the pass like a book and jump it, right? Elijah Martin did a really good job of jumping a couple passes as the weak side defender. And even a couple times on just the regular inbounds pass, when they extended the pressure more than 3/4 court, they'd go full court. South Carolina would inbound the ball in the short corner, which is the worst place to do it, because then you have 2 different boundaries that act as defenders too, where in essence you're getting quadruple teamed. And then Jacoby Wright, Zach Davis, a couple times just give the ball up at that point of the floor. And when you give the ball up at that part of the floor, the basket for Florida is significantly closer and it's easier to come by. So last night was a microcosm of handling pressure and not being able to handle defensive ball pressure. And that's why you're missing Talon Cooper so badly. I think even last night, that's where you're missing Jamari Thomas, even in that spot. Jamari's been maybe a little bit of disappointment from a shooting standpoint, and from an overall management of the tempo and the pace standpoint. But I think you win that game if Jamari's there, because Jamari can at least dribble out of some of those traps. It might look a little helter-skelter-ish, but at the same time, he'd get you out of that trap and get you the ball past half court. The lack of a true point guard is what cost you the game last night. It's just kind of a microcosm of the issues you've had all season long all come to fruition and end up kind of looking like that in spectacular fashion and blowing a chance to get a banner win on your resume.
And you mentioned Jamari. South Carolina, there's a chance they could get him back on Saturday against Mississippi State, which would be massive. So Lamont Paris was asked about that last night, and he basically said, like what I just said right there, there's a chance that they'll get him back. He's got to go through some more, he'll go through some stuff at practice today, and we'll see how he's doing. It's just about how the knee responds, because again, it was a right knee sprain. He was supposed to be out 3 to 4 weeks. I think the injury was officially announced 2 weeks ago, so this is still in the second week. And again, he had a crutch for the Auburn game that South Carolina lost. And then last night, no crutch or anything, was walking around. It still seemed like he probably wasn't 100%, but look, if you can get him anywhere near 85, 90%, I think you'll take that. And look, the guard play has not been good enough for South Carolina. Jacoby Wright is a nice piece to have, but he has not been consistent enough, and he hasn't been filling the point guard role, I think, to the best that we know he probably can. But it's also like you're not getting the problem with the South Carolina team is I don't think they have the true scoring guard, number one. I also feel like they don't have the true floor general out there.
Yeah.
And that's even with Jamari. Like, Jamari is as close as you're going to get to Talon Cooper, but even then, that's not saying it's a one-to-one comparison. It's the best South Carolina has right now to mimic what Talon did for this team last year. And again, there's no bigger loss than not having T. Coop back for the Gamecocks this year due to him being out of eligibility and all that. But we'll see if Jamari's good to go for Saturday. We'll have the SEC availability report out tomorrow, and we'll see if he's on there. Obviously, not getting Miles Studi back anytime soon, it would seem. But it's a good sign to get at least one player back. All right, the other parts of this game, we've talked about the turnovers and stuff, and the other thing with that is South Carolina. I mentioned this to you last night, Elijah. Florida had 22 points off of turnovers. You want to talk about a real issue with the mistakes that Carolina has. It's allowing teams like Florida, Auburn, Alabama, teams like that, Vanderbilt, cash in off your mistakes. I mean, that is ultimately a microcosm of why you're losing these games is teams will force mistakes and they will score easy, cheap buckets. And that's what we saw a lot of last night. I think the other thing we got to talk about is the missed opportunities. And this killed them in the Auburn loss, probably also killed them in the Vanderbilt loss. 2 games you lost by 1 possession, the free throw shooting. You didn't go to the line a ton last night, but Nick Pringle went 0-2 at the line. CMB missed a free throw, and Zach Davis missed a very important free throw down the stretch in the final seconds that could have put South Carolina ahead by 2 as Florida went on to go ahead and get the go-ahead bucket to win 70-69. I mean, how much do you look at that and kind of think like, man, it's like if they just make those free throws, it's so simple, but it's like they just couldn't get it done.
Well, that's how you win close games, right? When the margins are that thin, that's how you pull out of those games. And you look at the games that you've lost. I mean, let's look at just the one possession games that you've lost, right? Auburn, Vanderbilt, Florida. That is all in conference play. You won a one possession game against Clemson in the non-con. And in terms of one possession games, that's it. Or no, North Florida as well. You lost that one. That was a one possession game. And in that game, you go back and look at free throws. You're 14-25, 56% in that game. Yeah, you could say that cost you the game because the margins are so thin, and if you shoot that poorly from the free throw line, it's going to cost you. You go to Clemson and you look at the free throw numbers. 24 of 34. The fact that you made more free throws than they attempted is what won you the game, right? Like, I mean, Clemson attempted 21 free throws. You made 24. That's usually the standard a lot of coaches go by. So now you're 1-1 in one-score games. You go down to Auburn. Ultimately, the cumulative number, 9-16, bad, below 60%, cost you the game. Specifically, Nick Pringle's missed free throws at the end of that game. Vanderbilt, lose a one-score game. You're 18-23 at the line, which is your best of the season. So that might not have cost you as much, but Colin Murray-Boyles, your best player, did miss 2 crucial ones down the stretch, enough to where it mattered, right? Enough to where that ultimately mattered. And then last night, you have that shooting performance at the free throw line where, A, you didn't get to the free throw line a lot. And this is a team in South Carolina that coming into the game was top 15 in the country in a free throw rate, and you only got to the line 8 times, which is a miracle considering Pat Adams was one of the officials who is probably one of the whistle-happiest officials in college basketball, and both teams shot less than 10 free throws, but you were 4 of 8. And, like, sometimes you have to make your own luck. And a lot of people in the analytics community and in sports communities will talk about, luck in one-score games. That's why the Kansas City Chiefs are such an anomaly, and that's why I can't figure them out because they were 11-0 in one-score games, and the common theory is that you should win as many as you lose in one-score games because the margins are that thin, that it takes some luck. In basketball, it can be that way sometimes. You win a lot of one-score games and you don't lose a lot of them. Eventually, you will start losing those, and things will even themselves out. But ultimately, you kind of have to make your own luck, right? And some part of making your own luck is making sure you're not shooting yourself in the foot when you get free throw opportunities, and that's what kills you. I mean, last night it was a combination of two things: missing free throws, which you're pretty normally do anyway. This is a team that now you go in KenPom, they're ranked 284th in the country in free throw rate. This team, as a team, shooting 68.5% from the line. Your average Division I college basketball team is making 71%. So you're well below average. So that's not surprising. But like with the Clemson game, you didn't shoot a great percentage, but you shot so many free throws and you did such a good job getting to the line that you could ultimately create your luck if you just have more bites at the apple. But last night, you only shot 8. You only shot 8 free throws. And a lot of that had to do with you turning the ball over and just not being as aggressive. And you're playing a team that blocks a lot of shots. And you get your shot blocked a lot without fouling. And I think that's another thing that just hurts the team. You have a hard time creating your own luck. And if you can't take advantage of even the trips that you got to the line last night, you keep missing out on points. And that's how you dwindle away a lead. Free throws also in a game where a team's trying to come back can either be an elixir for a comeback, because that means the team that's trailing by a lot gets chances to score with the clock stopped, or it can be the ultimate detriment to a team trying to nurse the lead because you are missing shots where no one's guarding you with the clock stopped, giving the other team a free possession. And that's just what happened last night. It's a combination of missing the free throws and just straight up not getting to the line as much as you did throughout the entirety of the season.
Yeah. Schedule only gets tougher from here, though, and that's no
story of the season. Story of the season. It's going to get worse.
It's SEC play. We thought it honestly couldn't get much tougher than playing Mississippi State, Bama, and Auburn right out of the gate. But lo and behold, it's still very tough. Mississippi State on Saturday, Georgia next Tuesday in Athens, A&M at home, Kentucky at Rupp, Ole Miss at home on the 12th of February, and then you go to play Florida again, this time in Gainesville. I think your next favorable game will come against LSU. You go on the road to Baton Rouge on February 18th, but that's a whole month from now, and there's a lot of games in there that easily could be chalked up as losses if South Carolina doesn't, and we say this every game really, like figure it out. But they haven't really figured it out yet. I will say, though, for all the bad that we saw in that second half last night, I got to give props where it's due. I think that first half was about as good as South Carolina's played all season long. The energy was there right out of the gate. The student section was jammed last night. And I think, like I know the team hasn't been good, but it says a lot that the students showed up. Obviously you like more fans to show up in general, but we'll pass because of the travel and being on the roads and stuff with the snow. It's understandable. And also, I mean, not everyone is willing to go out and watch a at the time 0-5 team in SEC. But last night, that first half, energy was there. South Carolina was thriving off of it, using it to its advantage. They shot 50% from the field in that first half. Colin Murray Boyles was unguardable, it seemed at times. He had 5 assists in the first half when he finished with 8, a really good number. And I think this is about where, I mean, look, the turnovers were at 3. You're right in the middle of that rebound battle, and you were doing a really good job defensively. I feel like that's where South Carolina needs to be, right? That's much more on par with what we saw last year with this team. Now they just got to do it for a full 40 minutes. But that first 20 minutes last night, if there's any hope that you have still about this team, that 20 minutes, if you watched it last night, it's that first 20 minutes of that game, it's got to give you a little bit of hope that, like, it's there. It's just up to South Carolina to play a complete game and finish these games off, because they very well could be 3-3 right now in conference play with wins over top 5 teams in Auburn and Florida, and then beating Vanderbilt.
Yeah, I mean, I'll even give you this. I'll say that was the best 30-minute stretch this team has played all year long. So I'll give them that first 10 minutes of the second half. And this is like you played through Colin. And that's why I asked Lamont that last night. You know, like with 8 assists, was it something that you saw with how Florida was playing them? Because Florida was playing them straight up, kind of like what Auburn did, right? Florida didn't really send any help. I mean, I only counted on 2 different occasions last night that Florida sent any help over towards their defenders whenever Colin had the ball in the post. Will Richard had a dig in the second half, and then early in the first half, they kind of flash doubled for a second, and then kind of like hedging, like a ball screen. But they helped a little bit, but moved back to their man. But for the most part, Florida played one-on-one with Colin, and that's when Colin kind of thrives. And I was really surprised to see Florida take that approach against Colin. And last night, Colin made him play even when he got on the drive, and he still found open shooters, right? He's still, even when playing straight up, even if he wasn't scoring, he was finding open shooters. And this was probably his best passing game. At the top of the key, he had one awesome pass backdoor to Morris. I don't think Morris scored it, but it was an incredible backdoor pass. My favorite assist of his on the night. He's driving in the lane. Defender picks him up. He kind of reaches around the defender, throws a bounce pass across the baseline, then it finds Nick, and Nick gets a layup. And I'm like, that's the type of, court vision. That's the type of passing ability that Colin has that makes him a first-round NBA draft pick. I know a lot of people have disagreed as of late because he hasn't played his best, especially when it comes to taking care of the ball and scoring. But I'm telling you, that's the type of trait, and that's the type of plays that NBA scouts see and they salivate over, right? Especially from somebody with his size. That's why he is such an intriguing prospect to a lot of people. But you got the ball in his hands, and you let the offense run through him. You don't have a true point guard. Colin Murray-Boyles is going to be your facilitator and the fulcrum of your offense, as it should be. You run your offense like that last night, because, really, you lost the game because you couldn't get the ball past half court in the last 10 minutes of the game. That's why you lost. When you got the ball past half court, you were better than Florida. In the half court, defensively and offensively, you were the better basketball team last night. Mm-hmm. And if there's anything to kind of hang your hat on and to be excited about in terms of looking at growth in the very thin margin sometimes that you can find growth in basketball, that's one thing you can find growth in, is just how much better you were in the half court than the number 5 team in the country was. And it happened because you played fully through your best player, the player who should be the fulcrum of your offense. And I think they're starting to get towards that a little bit more.
They definitely are. And again, it's got to run through CMB. Lamont did say last night, look, Colin probably could have had a lot more points. I think that's clearly obvious when you have 8 assists. But he wants Colin to be getting the ball more frequently. And that's a good thing because he's your best player. And without Jamari, without Miles Studi, you need someone to be that guy. And when the guard play is not on the level where you want it to be, you got to ride with Colin and get him the ball more times than not. He's going to be able to score. But last night was a good game for him. Very under the radar type of game. Almost had a double-double with, keep in mind, he usually gets double-doubles with points and rebounds. Almost had a double-double with points and assists. So
yes. Yeah.
It makes you think, like, okay, he doesn't need to be a triple-double threat, but, when he's able to distribute the ball the way he can, he's basically like the point guard of your offense. So good game for him last night. Again, it's unfortunate South Carolina went down the way they did in this game, but that's the way the cookie's been crumbling this year, and they've got another opportunity on Saturday to try to get figured out, get that first win. Again, this is a Mississippi State team that just demolished them in Starkville a few weeks ago. But, hey, being at CLA, again, nothing, you never know what can happen. So any final thoughts, man, before we get on out of here?
Yeah, man. In terms of that Mississippi State game, I'll drop a quick one right here. In terms of something to watch, Mississippi State harassed Colin in that first meeting. They basically made him play in a phone booth the entire time. Mississippi State's one of the best defenses in the country in terms of not allowing drives in the middle of the floor. They love to keep you trapped on one side of the floor or the other, or in the short corner. And South Carolina fell into all of those traps in Starkville. How do they adjust? All right, this is a good test for the coaching staff as much as it is the team. How much do you adjust to put your players in a position to not fall in those traps, to allow yourself to turn the ball over time and time and time and time and time again? How can you get Colin in a position to get him going downhill without falling into a Keyshawn Murphy and Cameron Matthews' trap, which resulted in 6 turnovers, because those 2 dudes are some of the best in the country at forcing turnovers from opposing teams' bigs. Can you avoid that? That's what I'm really looking for. How is this offense going to operate? Knowing what they know after playing them the first time, how do you adjust? That's one thing I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, got to be able to adjust because, again, Mississippi State, they're going to be just as aggressive as Florida was, if not more, for a full 40-minute game. So that game is at 1 p.m. on Saturday at CLA. It's also going to be the football newcomers will be honored at halftime there. Shane Beamer's going to speak to the crowd for a minute to fire them up and all that good stuff. So lots going on over at the arena, and obviously women's basketball tomorrow, 5 p.m. on ESPN. Elijah, appreciate you joining me, my man. If you want to listen to him, he's on 107.5 The Game every day, 3 to 6 p.m. A lot of good stuff. I mean, this dude provides such great analysis about basketball and all the sports, to be honest. So appreciate you joining me, my man. We'll have you on again soon.
Always a pleasure hanging out with you, Jack. You're my guy. So anytime, man. I appreciate you.
Yeah, I appreciate you, man. I'll see you again soon.
Godspeed, brother.
I appreciate my man. And that is Elijah Campbell. I appreciate all of you guys tuning in. Definitely, we went a bit long today, but hey, that's what happens when you got one great team to talk about and one team that's just not playing their best basketball. So that's going to do it for now for GC Live at the Buzzer. We will be back again on Sunday Reset to talk about South Carolina, Mississippi State, and then we'll have some thoughts as well from the South Carolina LSU game for the women's side of things. And we'll also finally start talking a little bit of baseball as the Gamecocks are getting set to go for the preseason. They begin full team practices on Friday with 3 scrimmages this weekend. If you want to get out to Founders Park, all those scrimmages are going to be in the afternoon, 4:15 on Friday. And Saturday will be 4 o'clock, and then Sunday it'll be 4 o'clock as well. So if you need something to do, definitely head over to Founders, check this team out. We'll see what they look like. I'm really interested in getting over there. We'll hear from Paul Maneri tomorrow, as well as some of the players in the team media day. And we'll also hear from Gamecock softball a little bit with Ashley Chastain and some of the players hopefully as well. So that's going to do it for now. Be sure to stay locked into GamecockCentral.com for all live coverage and updates. And if you did miss this stream, have no fear. It'll be on our YouTube page. You can go back and watch it. And it'll also be on podcast platforms, wherever you get your podcasts from. So appreciate you guys all tuning in, and I'll see you on Sunday.